Okay, dear participants, welcome back. We're starting our session, and I would like to give the floor to Professor Dmitry Suslov for moderating this session and presenting our dear speaker.
Hello, Anastasia. Hello, everyone. My name is Dmitry Suslov. I'm Deputy Director at the Center for Comprehensive European and International Studies of the Faculty for World Economy and International Affairs of the Higher School of Economics. And it's my extreme pleasure to moderate this session devoted to international institutions between cooperation and national interests. Indeed, I think it is one of the most acute and important topics of international relations, because we are facing a profound increase of transnational and global challenges. Nowadays, it is one of the major characteristics of our times. Such challenges as global climate change, degradation of the global ecological situation, the pandemics, which we are all struggling with, turbulence of the global economy, transnational terrorism, transnational organized crime, and so on and so forth. And all those challenges require multilateral cooperation. Require efficient global governance, which is actually multilateral cooperation to struggle with those global and transnational challenges. However, and this is, I think, one of the puzzles of contemporary times, and one of the issues which are going to talk about right now, the effectiveness, the efficiency of traditional global governance institutions is going down. Maybe you've heard of the Valdai International Discussion Club. It is one of the major think tanks in Russia devoted to foreign policy and international relations. So the Valdai has published a report this year devoted primarily to the crisis of international institutions. And indeed, if we look upon traditionally established, traditional international institutions, many of them are not capable of dealing with these transnational problems. The number and significance of these problems is going up, despite the existence of these institutions. More and more decisions and efforts are made beyond the frameworks of these traditional institutions. And there is an increasing emergence and strengthening of new, alternative, more flexible institutions, more flexible arrangements to deal with transnational issues, such as, for instance, BRICS, in which Russia and China participate. And these new traditional, flexible, unofficial arrangements, seem to be much more capable, actually, in addressing transnational issues than the traditional institutions. And we're extremely lucky to have Dr. Viktoria Panova to discuss this problem about international institutions, not just because Viktoria Vladimirovna is one of the most renowned experts on multilateralism and international relations in Russia, and she is vice president for international relations of the Far Eastern Federal University, but also because she is the person who knows much more about BRICS and Russian policy within BRICS than anyone else in the Russian expert community, because Dr. Panova is also managing director of the Russian National Committee on BRICS Research, scientific advisor of BRICS Russia Expert Council. And indeed, we are very lucky to have such a renowned expert to discuss the problems of international institutions, maybe BRICS. Maybe Viktoria Vladimirovna will also say something about the results of the Russian chairmanship in BRICS and the prospects of this arrangement for the observable future. Anyway, the topic about how to address transnational issues and the role of international institutions remains one of the most central. And again, let me welcome Viktoria Vladimirovna. I think Viktoria Vladimirovna will make an introductory speech for about 30-something minutes. And then we will have Q&A. session. I'm sure you already know the rules about how to pose the question, but anyway, as a moderator, I have to say it again. Either you have to write your name and actually to say that you want to ask a question in the chat, or just raise your hand and I will be giving you the floor one after another. And now let me give the floor to Victoria Vladimirovna. Please, we are very thankful that you were able to join us.
Thank you so much, Professor Suslov, for such a kind introduction. It was indeed a real pleasure to have had you all throughout this year as part of our expert council. You've been really offering us insightful remarks on the foreign policy of those countries and their global governance developments that we're witnessing now. So it was we're still together, right? In this expert council, it's still there. It's not over yet, our chairmanship. It's drawing to a close. We've had, I think, quite a successful summit recently. We were the first ones to host their video conferencing one within BRICS. Our chairmanship will be special in many, many ways, hopefully substantial as well. I mean, not hopefully, I know already that's substantial as well. But allow me first to start with more general frameworks, because BRICS is just one of the bricks in this general edifice of global regulation, global governance. And if you look back a bit into history, last century, in the 1970s, you remember we had a number of crises also relevant for, and problems and challenges relevant for the international community that countries, their leaders, had to solve and had to attend to. And it was already back then clear that the international institutions existent, they're not quite up to the point. They're not quite up as efficient as they need to be. Of course, we all acknowledging the universality and their inadmissibility of any other way of, and the United Nations is there to stay, is their organization that allows us to, and allowed us for all those 75 years to sustain peace, to avoid the scourge of the next world war, to remain within one platform even when the countries that are members of the UN were on the totally polar positions with regards to different international issues. And it always stayed there as a single platform where the countries could continue to discuss things. And of course, it back in 1970s, today, in 2005 and today, it's a lot of talks and discussions are there to see how the United Nations have to be reformed. Nobody puts under any doubt that it should stay, but how it should function further on. That remains to be a question throughout the years of its existence. But we have to acknowledge that this is something that we need to adhere to. The principles of the Charter of the United Nations are there, common for all of us, and they allow us to be, in a way, at least on a minimum basis, on a single page. But as I said, why do we need to go back in history? We saw back in 1970s already that amount of transnational challenges, international crises and conflicts, they were not being solved efficiently with the help of the international organizations de jure that were existent. So international community needed to find some other ways to talk to each other in order to overcome those challenges. And it was back then we, the end of 60s and the early 70s, then we saw those experiments with two more types of global governance mechanisms. First would be international regimes. And we are in a way looking also at the crisis of international regime those days, because we see like one of the most renowned ones, one of the most familiar to everybody, non-proliferation regime is in a way crumbling. The arms control regime is crumbling. Climate regime is also crumbling. We have seen the total reverse of their initial participants, of how they, with what they approached this, and how they're behaving now, what are the goals they are putting now. The same could be said about the international trade regime or health regime, enough to cite the pandemics that each and every expert would be mentioning when talking about current situation. And once again, I want to stress that pandemics didn't bring us the new world. It only exacerbated, it accentuated the earliest problems that we had before. So it just brought about the crises that were either dormant or that were continuing, but they made them develop much faster and much more acute. And so the health regime, the crisis of international health regime, is also one of the demonstrations of why international institutions in this area, this type of international and global governance cooperation scheme is not working. And the third option that was also invented back in 1970s, and we're having it in a probably, hopefully more innovative way now, was the international club mechanisms. Back then it was the G7. You know, Russia at some point used to be part of this club, and at that point it was called the G8. We're having, interestingly, when Russia's and G7's paths have parted, a lot of experts, at least in the West, were talking about how much Russia have lost. But what we saw is that the G7 have lost their relevance completely. It's been going on for quite some time, but with their loss of this as a diverse platform, at least narrowly, we don't see any longer outreach, real meaningful outreach mechanisms of the G7. We don't see it solving really globally significant questions. And in fact, we don't see it working at all. You're just enough to mention this year. I think out of the three club mechanisms that we have, which is the G7, G20, and BRICS, the G7 was the only one that failed to perform at all. They couldn't even agree on how to proceed, on how to meet.
Victoria Vladimirovna, is everything fine?
I think the connection is probably.
I think the connection is lost, maybe.
Victoria Vladimirovna is back. Yeah, there was some interruption. So can you please repeat the last thing that you said is that G7 couldn't even come to any common position. So yeah,
they couldn't come to not even on agreement on a number of issues that are of common challenges that those 7 countries are having, plus EU. They couldn't even come to terms on who to talk to, on what to discuss, and how to meet. So this is a real crisis and failure. And what is important, this is a failure not of a club mechanism, but of a club mechanism that consists of the countries that used to be the rule makers in the world. They used to be the fashion designers for the global governance developments, but no longer this is the case. There are no outreach mechanisms and no significant issues that are being discussed within this club. But we do have the other two, and this is the G20 and the BRICS, which Professor Suslov have mentioned earlier. Why do we talk about club mechanism probably as their best fit, of course, in coordination and in complement to international organizations de jure, because they would not be functioning well enough without each other. We need this bureaucracy, established bureaucracy of international organizations that is there, that knows how to function, that is, of course, is very slow, but in a way, the bureaucracy and their actor-like functions that international organizations do acquire with that, it allows it to be more stable. And the club mechanisms like the G20 or BRICS, with their flexibility and lower bureaucracy and faster decision-making, they complement those big elephants with the new ideas, with the new ways of approaching the problems, and with the new modes of behavior. So what is it that makes club mechanisms still standing out? Of course, on the one hand, the flexibility is a problem, could be a problem, because if there's decision by the next established host not to discuss or not to meet, this would be the end to the club, theoretically, but it would be the end. Because we remember last year when we had a new political figure coming to power in Brazil, who was very conservative and extremely pro-American. There were some fears among expert communities that this could happen to BRICS because of the new Brazilian leaning. It didn't happen. And that is why when there are discussions on the need to institutionalize the process, I'm, as a watcher of those club mechanisms since, well, for the past 20 years. I've been going to most of the summits, including of the G8 ones, and I've been knowing it from the inside. And I can tell you, institutionalization is the best cure, is the best thing to do if you want to kill it. If you want to get rid of this instrument of influence, then of course do the institutionalization. If you want to keep their positive elements of the club mechanisms, then it has to stay like this. It has to allow leaders, heads of the states, heads of the governments, it has to allow them the flexibility of how they meet, what types of questions they discuss, and the flexibility not to go too deep into bureaucratic procedures of the preparations. And this is the best part of those clubs. And with our chairmanship this year, we saw that it is flexible enough in order to respond to the challenges that arise. It's not just you have to put the question on the floor, it has to be agreed by everybody, and then you have to work through it. So before it actually comes to certain fruition, it is probably no longer relevant. But with the clubs, you can do it all along the go. And thus the pandemics and all the geopolitical tensions that increased during this year, all the economic problems that rose, all those were addressed even within the initial framework of the Russia's priorities, because it was flexible enough in order to take into account their international developments, and also in order to hear what the partners were saying. And this is another plus for the club mechanisms as opposed to international organizations de jure. And this is much more a feature of BRICS than, let's say, of the G7, and that's why it's not failing so far, even with the different political leanings of its leaders. The BRICS and the G20 to a lesser extent, because they're too many, too different, and the amount of basic principles they have that are common, they are smaller than that of the BRICS. So the thing is, the BRICS could be, on the one hand, flexible, respond to the common challenges, but not cross the red lines of each other. And this is also extremely important. The mutual respect, mutual consideration of interests, even during the times when the countries could have problems on the bilateral level, that allows to mitigate those problems within the multilateral framework. You would remember that this year was difficult, not just because of the pandemics and inability to meet in person after February, even earlier, but we moved completely to their video conference on a dual format with only Russians and those who are in Russia present, and the rest joining online only after that. So the point is that we were able to, we saw the bilateral tensions between two biggest states of the BRICS community. We saw this border standoff. At the same time, the ability of BRICS to remain neutrally friendly with both countries, and those benevolent ensuring that the two countries have to solve the issue together, that there was readiness to help when necessary, but at the same time, there was mutual understanding that there could be no dictate. If you look at the mode the G7 is working, and when we have chairmanship of countries that are part of the, let's say, the West, it's always tried to be put into the agenda. There is no pressure. There is peer review, there's peer help, but no peer pressure. And this is extremely important for BRICS. And I think in this world, that we have, which is extremely turbulent, when countries that are having comparable potential, cumulative, right? Some could be stronger in economic area, some could be stronger in technological areas, some could be stronger in military area. Some have bigger influence in a combination of those areas. But there is still an inability of just one country or a set of countries that agree on a very firm set of principles to dictate. There is no other way to go on without going into real conflicts if you do not talk respectfully to each other and if you don't take into account different positions. And this is what BRICS knows how to do. So no crossing of red lines is extremely important. And at the same time, please don't make mistake of it. I told you just a few moments ago that I'm totally against institutionalization. I will keep to that as a matter of experience of empirical evidence that I have. But at the same time, what is important, while those mechanisms remain flexible, it is also extremely important that we do continue having horizontal integration within those clubs. And this is another feature that offers them a better functioning, a better response to current challenges. We have not only chemistry and possibility of informal cooperation between the leaders. Some of them change more frequently, some less frequently, so they could be established better ties. But at the same time, those people on different levels, our Sherpas, our ministers, our businessmen within the BRICS Business Council, our civil society and expert community within BRICS Think Tank Council that's been also established as BBC back in Durban in 2013. They continue having annual regular cooperation on a number of areas. And that is why when this year, and sometimes it gets institutionalized. So as I mentioned, 2013, we had two institutions established within the BRICS Business Council, BRICS Think Tank Council, and they continue working. And they continue looking into ways of enhancing cooperation, of finding new schemes of influencing and the two-way street with the governments of the BRICS, and they offer new topics, and this is extremely important. So it's a internal institutionalization on the other levels, horizontal cooperation that happens in BRICS that allows it to continue and not to be dependent on their on the topics, on the political leanings of its leaders. It would stay there. I can tell you this year we moved to this format, online format, but what we worked on for the previous decade with the friends that already made with our on different levels in BRICS. And those people could be moving from expert community to government, from government to civil society, from civil society to entrepreneurship. Nevertheless, those people stay there, and it allows to, in fact, having those ties already established, set out with the new modes of cooperation, finding new ways and new topics of discussion. Because we started out with mostly talking about economic ties. Remember back 12 years ago, actually somewhat more, because officially it talks about 2006 as the first year, although their summit itself happened in Yekaterinburg back in 2009, also in Russia. But what we established now is much more than that. It's not for nothing that the Russian chairmanship outlined three main topics, three main trends, directions of cooperation: politics and global governance, economics and finance, and then humanitarian contacts and people-to-people cooperation. That's because it's no longer their economic entity that would be talking mostly about how to enhance each other or use each other for the benefit of your dynamic development. It's about mutually enhancing place in the global arena in all areas. It's a fully fledged, formed geopolitical, geoeconomic actor. And this what helped, and this happened because those horizontal ties were established. It would not have been enough. This couldn't have happened within the international organization, the UN. This needed more deeper immersion into activities of the BRICS, a desire to talk more to each other and to expand and explore opportunities like that. And that is why one of the biggest achievements this year, we have a new economic partnership strategy. You remember that for the previous one that happened for the year of 2015-20, we saw their increase in mutual intra-BRICS cooperation, which was outpacing that of the cooperation of the 5 countries with the outside world. 45% bigger. Their growth of exports and imports between the BRICS as opposed to their growth with their other countries. The vivid demonstration is, you remember, there were forecasts by Western analytics who said that it will BRICS will surpass by GDP, PPP, the G7 in 2032. We already see it. It happened much earlier, much faster, because we were exploring those options and we were going together. Although, of course, being critical analysts, you would find weak spots and weak points there, and it's normal. But what matters is the desire to explore and to see how to overcome those difficulties, how to overcome those weaknesses, and to find more common points. In politics, enough to mention the anti-terrorist strategy, right? Counter-terrorist strategy. And the work of the relevant working groups of the BRICS. It's also been extremely important. Of course, BRICS is not in any way military alliance, so we're not talking about anything that would be compromising their commitments or approaches globally in this area. But they are standing together in order to secure peace and to secure diplomacy in the global arena, and to counter those challenges that do have both military and non-military character and that are transnational in their design. Same would go in the third area, humanitarian contacts. We had, and I can tell you this was one of their ideas that BTTC brought to the leaders, their BRICS Network University. And it just took us 1 year. After 1 year, after it was offered and the recommendations of the expert community, we saw it next year going into their BRICS leaders statement. And now we're also witnessing development in this cooperation. Same STI, science, technology, and innovation. This is the area where BRICS, even the strongest and the most advanced country like China in this area, would not be able to go on its own. Not only because America is there to counter Chinese efforts and to contain it. It's because technology and innovation is the most acute problem, and this is there to either to ensure that the country is in the forefront of development, in advancement of development, or if it's going to stay somewhere in the outskirts. And only one country, even with all its potential, cannot go on its own. And that is why BRICS is offering really great opportunity for each of the BRICS to put in their strong sides in order to achieve general advancement and to better weather the storms of the outside Western and not only Western dominance in this area and other areas. So I think this is important to remember that. And each of our countries understand that what we have, we can use this mechanism in order to not only show ourselves as responsible actors in the global world, because this is also what we do. You remember among their topics that were discussed was their adherence to multilateral trade, to the role of WTO, to how the WHO has to be reformed and how it should continue going, to the role of the United Nations and in its principles, etc., etc., etc. So BRICS those days seems to be the only entity in the global arena that is in fact confirming its complete adherence to those international norms. This is already important politically, but what's more, it's working on offering concrete plans, concrete cooperation schemes in order to enhance this international cooperation, which in turn enhances their own stand. So I think this is important. So I see there are already some questions. Maybe I will, because I can talk about international institutions, BRICS, G20, more than 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours. But I think it would be more interesting if we do the Q&A and have a more interactive discussion.
Thank you very much, Victoria Vladimirovna. Very interesting, comprehensive, and brilliant presentation. Let me just briefly emphasize what I consider very important from what Victoria Vladimirovna just said. First, it is extremely important for all of you, all the students, to keep in mind that traditional international organizations and club mechanisms are indeed complementary. The club mechanisms such as BRICS should not be considered as a substitute to traditional economic institutions, right? That they would replace traditional economic institutions, traditional international organizations, and in the future we will have only club mechanisms, and the organizations like UN and other will disappear. This is not the case. They really need each other. They can be considered like two sides of the same coin. And indeed, if you look upon many declarations of BRICS summits, you will see that lots of the chapters in these declarations are formulated in the following way: that we need to coordinate our positions and present these coordinated positions within the traditional international organizations. And actually the ability to come along and to elaborate a common position on this or that issue of global governance, and then to jointly defend and promote this common position in the established traditional international organizations such as the UN or World Trade Organization or World Health Organization is one of the major, most important things, one of the major contributions of these club organizations. Also, BRICS claims that its purpose is to reform global governance, to make global governance more just, increase the role of developing countries in global governance, and create a more polycentric, just or fair international order. This also entails a reform of international organizations, of traditional international organizations, not dissolution of them, but reformation of them. So what I want to emphasize is indeed the complementarity of traditional and more flexible new multilateral arrangements. So talking about Russian-Chinese relations, the fact that we cooperate within BRICS and cooperate quite effectively does not mean that we no longer need Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for instance, right? We need both between Russia and China. They are both complementary and play a significant role. And secondly, it is also important to keep in mind that it is wrong to assume that all club arrangements are efficient, whereas all international traditional organizations are non-efficient, right? The situation is more nuanced, more complicated, and Victoria Vladimirovna brilliantly pointed out to G7, which is a club organization, but not very efficient at the moment. Just I think it is necessary to keep those points in mind. Now, let us indeed turn to the Q's and A's. There is a question from Arina Korshunova, who was the first to ask the question. She said that she cannot ask the question personally, but wants the question to be voiced. So I will just read the question for everyone. As we know, BRICS strives to create its own currency. In 2019, one of the approved loans from the new development banks for Brazil was approved as partially sponsored in RMB, in yuan. Does this mean that the yuan will become one of the possible currencies of the BRICS? Victoria Vladimirovna, please.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Arina. Very interesting one. I can tell you that BRICS Bank, the new development bank, is now working with the two currencies. So its loans could be usually offered either in US dollars or renminbi. This doesn't mean that yuan would become the international currency for the BRICS. Instead, what the BRICS are discussing now, especially in the times when we have their desire of some countries who irresponsibly use their currency, that is reserve currency now, to sanction and to pressure the other countries for their national egoistic purposes, illegally, because it is usually done, and well, not usually, it is done not within their, as a result of Security Council, UN Security Council decisions. So there are discussions that BRICS would be using its national currencies, all the 5 national currencies, in order to have them in their economic interactions. For technical reasons, now we only have those 2 that I named. The US dollar is international reserve currency, and renminbi, that is kind of that went through certain procedures in order to become not probably fully convertible, but still present as an international currency as well. You should also remember there was this framework agreement between the BRICS where they pledged that they will be using their national currencies in their mutual trade and mutual crediting. It's an extremely complicated procedure. It just requires, as I said, lots of technical and political and financial specificities that are being discussed now. I can tell you already the creation and establishment of the NDB is a huge step. The G7 countries didn't manage to do something like that, even within the 10 years of their first existence. They couldn't coordinate their policies as much. BRICS managed to launch NDB. It's now fully convertible. It's over 20 billion if we count in US dollars still. US dollars projects that were approved, I think it's 64 totally, but the sum is over 20 billion. And we also having their, how you call it, in national currencies, not only in yuan, we have the decisions to place credit lines in the countries, in their national currencies. But decision to use all the 5 national countries currencies not within the framework agreement needs more work. And that is why I can tell you there's been some intense discussions this year. I hope that when we have probably, let's say, ability to personally interact and meet, there could be a much faster progress. But nevertheless, it's, I think financial authorities in each country is one of the most conservative areas. And as I said, that's already a huge step with the establishment of NDB and also CRA, contingent reserve arrangement, which is still to show itself. It still didn't perform practically. But there's no discussion of having just one currency of one country as their BRICS currency. The discussion is to use all the 5 national currencies and to be able to go away from the US dollar and to weather the storms that the US irresponsible policies are bringing when countries do not completely go in following their national interests, not those countries, but United States national interests, which none of the BRICS would be willing to follow, of course, because each of us have our national interests and our common international stance in this regard. I hope I answered that.
Thank you very much, Victoria Vladimirovna. You certainly did. Now, for the sake of balance, let's have a question from a Chinese participant. So, Mr. Yu Yici, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you for the host, and thank you, Dr. Panova, for a great report. During your report, you mentioned that multilateral on different levels, businessmen, entrepreneurship, policymakers, they were able to join comprehensive discussion at BRICS summits, which is wonderful. Now my question concerns about sustainable development issues in an international context, because as we all know, in Central Asia, Chinese investment is facing serious challenges, some of which, of course, propagated by English-speaking media. But of course, there were genuine problems like not hiring local workers, environmental issues. These were all genuine questions. And now when our group, school group is doing the research on this region, I just couldn't find there's a huge gap between what UN sustainable goals proclaim to follow, and of course, many states saying we are following. The huge gap between the stated goals and the real local practices among the businessmen, maybe entrepreneurs and the local governments. We don't see that level of cooperation, especially in the Eurasia area. And I'm wondering, would you share a bit more about how it's possible to regulate commercial activities in international context? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So I can tell you that with regards to SDGs, even though it was among their claimed priorities of the BRICS, we do not see really intense pentalateral cooperation. We see efforts on the part of each of the BRICS countries, like Russia this year presented its voluntary review. We had other BRICS countries offering the same earlier, but I did not see so much of pentalateral cooperation in this regard. This is true. In fact, we've pointed this out to the governments, and it was among our recommendations that what UN suggested as a means of peer review in achieving the SDGs should be implemented by the BRICS and practiced by the BRICS. In fact, they can have a joint monitoring. And since BRICS are quite perceptive to what its epistemic community is doing, we can undertake this role as monitoring what their BRICS businessmen are doing in each of the BRICS countries and beyond, including in Central Asia. But I can tell you, not just Eurasia. Think about Brazil and Amazon forests and what's happening in there with the commercial activity, or with India and use of coal, or South Africa, the same, right? And we can continue. So I think there should be probably more pressure on governments from their expert community, and also closer inter-horizontal cooperation, because for example, we don't see that much of interaction between BRICS Business Council and BRICS Think Tank Council, for example. And so far we see governments inviting big business of the BRICS to talk at the summits and to meet them. But experts are usually given a smaller place in their agenda. Because of course, experts are drawing attention to issues like you are mentioning. What we can do as a first step, or a second step, because first could be the suggestion of monitoring. And we've worked out this year, and it's been adopted at their academic forum, and it also was accepted by the Sherpas. That is about, we worked out a system of indicators, and part of those indicators are devoted to Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals, of how BRICS countries are cooperating in this regard. What we've done so far, we've done within this overview of this economic partnership strategy. You can find it online. It's already posted on the official site. You remember the previous SEP, it had it had special section on SDGs, and we found out what's been done, what's not been done, mostly not been done. So you could study this document and see what's not been done, and we will continue this monitoring procedure, and this will be showing to the BRICS governments their weak spots and where they're not performing well. That's number one. But number two, what we can do, another document we've prepared this year is the data bank of the best practices for their remote and rural territories of the BRICS, where they in different areas, be it digitalization, infrastructure development, environmental projects, we're exploring, and we put in one place their the data bank of best practices from each of the BRICS. So what we can do is study of what each of us have done, both globally, regionally, and locally, and thus probably either improve our own projects or look into possibility of international bilateral or multilateral cooperation schemes within this best practices. So I think this could be the solution. At least this is a practical step. And you know, a lot has been talked about climate, which is a part of sustainable development in this regard. And we've just had China announcing of carbon neutral development till 2060, right? If I'm not mistaken. So
yes.
So I think we could continue both monitoring what's been done and pushing our governments into into using best practices from each of the five and enhancing each other with that. I don't see other steps so far. This is probably the first thing we can do, and then think of other long-term decisions like that of, you remember there is this UN Global Compact for business, right? So we can think of some BRICS principles for business where BRICS governments would be supporting business of from their countries that would be following the principles enlisted in this compact. But for the BRICS, this is another step that we can make. So just few of the decisions that could be introduced. But definitely this is extremely important what you've raised, especially because the pandemics have did push back, in addition to some bad practices, right? The progress that was there with the BRICS countries, or actually all over the world in achievement of the SDGs. And we could see it only on national levels as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, the pandemic was a very good stress test and a very good indicator of the multilateralism. Now let's go to one of the Russian participants, and I would ask Eka Horbaladze to ask her question.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon and good evening, dear participants. Thank you, Dmitry Vyacheslaevich, for giving opportunity to ask question, and also thanks a lot, Victoria Vladimirovna, for sharing your opinion. It is really valuable. For a big amount of reasons, BRICS today is considered to be a successful international union. Most of them you have already mentioned, but I guess that today exist some problems, or maybe not problems, but challenges that BRICS have to overcome. So it's a spread opinion that if BRICS was a fully fledged international organization, it has a possibility to overcome them more effectively or faster. However, from discussion, I'm not sure that this approach should be the right one, because as you mentioned, international organizations aren't very successful to cope today's problems. So it would be very interesting to hear your opinion. Does BRICS really need to become the fully fledged international organization, or maybe, even if is in this sphere any work in this direction? Thanks a lot.
I think I've devoted quite a lot of my talk to the view that it is extremely harmful for the BRICS to move into direction of institutionalization. What is necessary is that we do keep this flexibility, but within this flexible mode, we're able, 5 of us, to come to conclusions that could be put forward within the already established international organizations. And this has been done both within the international organizations, de jure. Of course, we do not always have the same stance within, for example, UN Security Council. There are moments when we had all 5 of the BRICS in there as permanent and non-permanent. But usually it's not a contradictory one. So it's either, if it's not the common stance, then it's not contradicting to each other. But we had a few examples when we came out with this similar approach. Same could be within the G20. You remember there was the BRICS stance, which allowed to achieve certain steps, like just remember the IMF reform. The only 1 quarter review that happened was due to BRICS pressure, and it was done within their G20 and later on forwarded to IMF. We didn't manage to push the other countries to do diligent and fair recognition of further increasing role of the developing countries, and that is why we have the NDB, which is a complementary instrument, financial instrument in their global arena. But the first step that moved the whole architecture was the BRICS joint position. So I think what they need to do is they come up with non-institutionalized manner with joint positions, then put them forward much faster, much less bureaucratic within the other international institutions, but also provide for more institutionalization on lower levels, on the horizontal integration between different stratas of its societies and its institutions within BRICS, within the country. So this would be the most efficient mode.
Thank you very much. Let me ask a follow-up question, and probably it will be the last question since our time is going to expire. You made it very crystal clear that BRICS does not need institutionalization in terms of turning into a traditional international organization. But what about enlargement of BRICS, adding some other countries? Look, BRICS has already underwent enlargement because it started like BRIC, then South Africa joined, and now we are 5 within BRICS. BRICS positions itself as a club of like-minded countries who share the ideal of polycentric, fair international order without hegemony, increase of the role of developing countries, reform of global governance, and so on and so forth. And there are, in addition to these 5 group of countries, there are also countries in the world who share the same ideals. There is and who are quite significant and powerful and could contribute to the performance of BRICS. There is Indonesia, for instance, one of the largest countries of the Southeast Asia. There is Turkey, which is very significant now in Eurasia and is increasingly conducting an independent foreign policy, not like a loyal ally of the United States, but really performing as an independent great power, right? The conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh is a very good illustration to that. So what do you think about this further enlargement of the of BRICS?
Well, Turkey, not just Nagorno-Karabakh, look at Cyprus as well. That's the two best shown instances. Well, let me tell you this. First of all, if we start talking about enlargement, then we have to take into account all those countries. It's like with in a way similar discussion to the UN Security Council enlargement. So why do we have those 4 and not the other 4 who consider themselves no less significant, right? So then we will be talking about not just one country, because now when we were talking about South Africa joining in the BRICS, first we had already IPSA, so we had South Africa familiar with at least 2 and working with them on a number of levels with the BRICS, with the Brazil and India, right? So it was easier to integrate. It was also important because Africa was the big developing continent, and now BRICS is truly a global mechanism, global entity. When we start talking about other countries, we can no longer say, well, we need to introduce them because BRICS needs to get a global positioning. It already has that. If we talk about asking other countries in, first of all, they have to themselves have a very clear desire that they want to join. That's number 1. Number 2, if there are a set of countries that want to join, we immediately compromise the efficiency of the club. Now it's 5 countries, 5 very different countries, of course, similar foundational principles, but it's already a laborious work to achieve meaningful results. Of course, if we want to stay on a talk shop level, we can have 5 more very important states, developing ones, turn BRICS into something like the G20, have discussions, say where they're developing countries gathering, and this makes us more legitimate. Well, we're not pretending, BRICS is not pretending to be the substitute for the United Nations or for anything else. It's not pretended to be some global directorate. What BRICS need to do, and they're doing it efficiently so far within their number of 5, they are offering new solutions, new ideas in different areas, which other countries that share this view could join And that is why we're having, for example, NDB, that is initially made up of 5 countries, discussions of the further enlargement of the NDB. Let's see how it works when a new development bank has this first enlargement. After it is agreed, we see how it works. And then we could have other initiatives with the BRICS Plus, where countries that share those views could join. And I think this would be already the most efficient way, not just enlargement for enlargement, because we want to showcase it to somebody, you know, to the United States, to Europe, that we're cool. We already know we're cool, right? We are doing some things that they do not manage to perform those days. So we need to stay efficient. In order to stay efficient, we need to come up with the new ideas, come up with the new solutions, and then invite in those new solutions those who share our values. And this would be the best way to go forward. When there is a total comprehensive convergence, and we see it with that the other countries that joined a number of initiatives already there, then we could discuss it. Then this would be not just a discussion for discussion, this would be meaningful. I think this doesn't make sense to talk about it practically before that. But that's my view.
Thank you very much indeed, Victoria Vladimirovna. I fully agree with you. And moreover, BRICS actually offers more flexible instruments of engaging other countries, such as BRICS Plus, which can be a flexible way of engaging those countries that we really need and who really wants to participate on this particular issue or aspect of global governance. And I think strengthening BRICS Plus should be one of the major priorities of BRICS for the future. Look, dear friends, we need to finish this session. We're already over the time, but I think it was a very, very interesting discussion. And I think the major conclusion that should be made after discussing all those aspects of global governance, international traditional institutions, more flexible multilateral arrangements such as BRICS, is that despite the growing egoism and unilateralism worldwide, multilateralism is not dead. You know, one of the most widespread narratives in the West nowadays is that multilateralism is disappearing and we are entering a global chaos in which every country will pursue its egoistic unilateralist policy. And actually, according to the majority of the Western experts, people like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, the Russian presidents, are usually presented as the major enemies of multilateralism, who kind of undermine the multilateral institutions. Look, this is not true. And what we've just heard from Viktoria Panova is that a new multilateralism has not just emerged, but is booming and is developing quite successfully. And despite the crisis of many traditional institutions, multilateral structures and efforts and multilateral participants of global governance are there, and they are developing, they are adjusting to the changing international environment, and thus we have a future, right? More positive future ahead of us. So thank you very much, Victoria Vladimirovna. Very interesting and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you for all the students, for all the participants, for your active participation and questions. And I wish you good luck and success with the continuation of this Russian Chinese school. Thank you very much.